In the deep, untouched bushlands of New South Wales, the air is usually still. For generations, this silence was the only neighbor to a family known simply as the Colts. To the outside world, they were just nomads, drifters who preferred the isolation of the wild over the noise of civilization. But behind the rusted gates and makeshift tents, a biological nightmare was unfolding. This wasn't just a family living off the grid. It was a clan of 38 people bound together by a secret so dark, it defied every law of nature and man. Inside this camp, the concept of father, brother, and uncle didn't exist in the way you know it. Here, the family tree didn't grow branches. It folded inward, over and over again, for 4 straight generations. Today, we go inside the Valley of Silence to uncover the disturbing reality of the Colt clan, the family that became a circle. For decades, the Colt family lived like ghosts. They were a nomadic tribe, constantly moving from one patch of Australian bushland to another, ensuring they stayed just out of reach of society's gaze. But in 2012, their wall of silence finally cracked. It didn't start with a police raid. It started with a whisper in a classroom. One of the children from the clan, who had briefly surfaced in the local community, made a comment to a classmate that chilled the teachers to the bone. The child spoke about a sister who was pregnant, but then added a confusing detail. They didn't know who the father was, because it could be any of the brothers. When the authorities finally descended upon their camp, they weren't prepared for what they found. They discovered 38 people living in a single, makeshift home constructed from tarps and scrap metal. Inside, there were no walls, no privacy, just rows of mattresses lined up like a refugee camp. But it was the children who truly haunted the officers. These children didn't know how to interact with the world. When spoken to, they looked at the floor, terrified of eye contact. Their speech was slurred and broken, a linguistic mess that made them nearly impossible to understand. They looked malnourished, their skin covered in infections from the lack of clean water. Their teeth were black from neglect. It was as if they hadn't just been living off the grid, they had been living in a different century entirely. And then, there was the smell. A suffocating mix of trash, rotting food, and animal waste. This was the environment where 4 generations of the Colt family were born, lived, and multiplied. To understand how a family reaches this level of depravity, you have to look at their roots. But in the case of the Colts, the roots don't grow deep. They grow back into themselves. This wasn't just a single mistake. It was a deliberate construction of a clan. It began decades ago with a brother and a sister, a direct blood union that produced a daughter named June in 1948. For a moment, the cycle seemed to break when June married an outsider, Tim Colt, in the 1960s. Together, they had 7 children, 5 daughters and 2 sons. On the surface, they looked like a large, perhaps eccentric, nomadic family. But Tim Colt wasn't a savior for this bloodline. He became its darkest architect. Tim began fathering children with his own flesh and blood. He turned his youngest daughter, Martha, into a victim of his own twisted legacy. And when Tim passed away, the poison didn't leave with him. It had already seeped into the next generation. The family didn't look for partners in the outside world. They chose to stay within. Martha transitioned from her father to her own brother, Frank. Cousins slept with cousins, uncles with nieces. In the Colt clan, the roles of father, grandfather, and brother often belonged to the same man. They lived in a closed loop, ensuring that no outside blood would ever taint their secluded world. They weren't just a family anymore. They were a biological island where the laws of nature had been rewritten by the hands of their own kin. To step into the Colt compound, was to step into a different reality, one where the basic standards of human dignity had long been forgotten. The house was nothing more than a patchwork of rotting wood and blue tarps, held together by desperation and neglect. Inside, there were no walls to separate the children from the adults, no private spaces for the innocent, just rows of mattresses spread across the floor like a grim barracks. And then, there were the animals. In a bizarre and disturbing twist, the family shared their cramped living space with wild kangaroos. But these weren't pets. According to investigators, the animals were subjected to the same depravity as the family members themselves. It was a chaotic ecosystem of filth, where animal waste and human garbage cluttered every corner. When investigators opened the refrigerator, they found a reflection of the family's internal decay, nothing but rotting, blackened vegetables. There was no running water, no toilets. If someone needed to relieve themselves, they dug a hole in the dirt outside. A primitive existence that left every member of the clan suffering from severe, untreated skin infections. They lived in a cycle of poverty and filth. But to the Colts, this was the only world that mattered. A world where they were free to indulge in their darkest impulses, hidden away from the prying eyes of a society that would never understand. Nature has its own set of laws, and when they are broken for generations, the toll is paid in blood and bone. For the Colt clan, the result of their isolation wasn't just a moral collapse, it was a biological catastrophe. Out of the many children born into this twisted web, 12 were found to have severe genetic abnormalities. These weren't just physical deformities. Their very ability to think and process the world was stunted. Their minds were trapped in a fog of developmental delays, the direct consequence of a gene pool that had become a stagnant pond. But the physical damage was only half the story. The psychological scarring was deeper and far more predatory. When the children were finally placed in state care, the staff was horrified by what they saw. A 5-year-old girl, who knew nothing of normal affection, would repeatedly try to kiss male caregivers on the mouth. A 12-year-old boy was observed groping an 8-year-old girl, showing behaviors that no child should even understand. In one of the most chilling reports, an 8-year-old girl attempted to force an adult stranger to engage in sexual acts with her. They weren't being evil, they were simply mimicking the only life they had ever known. In the world of the Colts, innocence didn't exist. Children were initiated into a life of sexual activity almost as soon as they could walk, their boundaries erased by the very people who were supposed to protect them. The discovery of the Colt clan sent shockwaves through Australia and the world. The adults were arrested, their reign of silence finally broken by the gavel of a courtroom. But for the survivors, the journey was only beginning. Reports suggest that through intense therapy, some members of the family are finally learning the basic concepts of humanity that we take for granted. They are learning how to be clean, how to maintain hygiene, and how to exist without the constant shadow of abuse. Several of the younger children have since been adopted into normal homes. For the first time in 4 generations, a Colt descendant has a chance to go to school, to play, and to breathe air that isn't thick with the scent of decay. The story of the Colt family is a dark stain on human history, a reminder of what happens when a community is left to rot in total isolation. It's a tragedy that makes our own everyday problems seem small in comparison. As these children grow, the hope is that the family tree will finally begin to grow straight, leaving the twisted, circular path of their ancestors behind forever.